Hi everyone, Lisa and Dan here from Fireside Strategic. We're on a mission to build a warmer, more human, and more profitable business world. In the Fireside Chat series, we're celebrating inspiring leaders who care both about the strategic and human side of building great organizations. Right now, we're excited to be chatting with Cameron Herold, founder of COO Alliance. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey Lisa, thanks for having me. Hey Dan, good to be here.
So could you tell our audience a little bit about COO Alliance? What is it?
Sure. Yeah, the COO Alliance is the only network of its kind in the world for the second in command. And I've played the second in command role a few times over my career, and I kept showing up at these events that were made for entrepreneurs. I would show up at a YPO event or an EO event or a Vistage event or the Genius Network and Maverick and Baby Bathwater and Strategic Coach. And I was always surrounded by entrepreneurs. And I really didn't fit in. Even though I run a company today and I was a co-partner in a few of the businesses, when I was in the very deep COO operational role, I wanted to get deep into some of the discussions, and the CEOs tended to fly at kind of the 30,000 foot level. I'll give you an example. At one point, I heard an entrepreneur one time say, we got to get all the right people on the bus. And that was his discussion about recruiting. I'm like, that's it. Like, he was like, yeah, good talk. I'm like, wait. Like, let's talk about the recruiting. Let's talk about the interviewing. Let's talk about onboarding and training and leadership development and getting them into the, no. We got to talk about marketing now. I'm like, you didn't. So it was it was the wrong space. And we needed a space for the people that just wanted to be in this second in command role. So that was the purpose for starting it.
Well, I'm curious to learn a little bit about you and what attracted you to those kinds of roles in the first place. What made you a natural COO?
Well, and it's interesting. I'm a natural COO probably because I had to learn skills to counter my massive attention deficit disorder and bipolar disorder. So I am clinically a bit of a disaster case. I have 17 of the 18 signs of attention deficit disorder, which for an entrepreneur is a superpower because I see everything that's happening around me and I get distracted by everything, which means I'm very keenly aware of what's happening with the market, the economy, time, suppliers, customers, culture, everything. And then I get bored of it, so I delegate it quickly. So it helps me grow things. And then my bipolar disorder is very manic, and then the stress and depression is just simply course correcting after being, burning out the adrenals. So I've learned how to counter that with a little bit of obsessive compulsive OCD. I also was groomed as an entrepreneur. So I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. My mom and dad raised all three kids to be entrepreneurs, and my brother and sister and I have all run our own companies for between 15 and 25 years. And then when I was in university, I had my first real business with 12 employees, but I was a franchisee of a company. So I was in second year university, bought a franchise, and operated a business for 3 years. And I was so scared of failing that I did everything the operations manual said to do. And I think that's what showed me the core of operations was almost being terrified of screwing it up. And that's how I learned how to kind of shortcut all of the complicated systems. So I was the dumb kid in school. I was 64% in college. I went to the only university that accepted me. But I figured out the cheat sheets. And that's kind of why I wanted this space for the COO. So when I had a couple of second in command roles, but the one I became most known for, I was the second in command for 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And I took that company from 14 employees to 3,100 employees in 6 years as the COO through that tenure. So that's what really kind of gave me the marketing chops, even though I'd done it a couple times before.
I love that story. And I love how your journey into becoming a COO was almost a personal one, where you were working on yourself and some of the things that you have personally had to overcome to build a successful life. And you apply that same thing to organizations.
Yeah. And for me, when I was in school, I couldn't learn from studying hard. If I worked really, really hard at school, I would still get 64% because either my mind was scattered, or I couldn't organize all my thoughts, or I couldn't get it all out quickly or properly, or it was too complicated. And then I got bored, and I was running businesses. I was really running. I did a talk that's on the main TED.com website about 10 years ago about raising entrepreneurial kids. And I think I had about 16 different entrepreneurial ventures by the time I was 18 years old. So, every day that I was in school, I was selling stuff. I used to day trade stocks when I was 16, but I was day trading out of the newspaper because there was no internet. So I was just very distracted in the school system. So I had to learn the cheat sheets. I had to learn the shortcuts. And I had to learn that the smart kids had the answers, so I would copy off them. Well, now that's collaborating. I had to learn, to look in the back of the textbooks for the answers. Now that's called Google. So I had to learn there were other ways around it versus studying really hard. And I also realized, I think I was in about grade 6 or 7, when I really had a very cognizant moment that no one was ever going to care about my grades. So I realized that no matter how hard I worked, no one was actually going to care. So I got my undergraduate degree in law at Carleton University, and I've got my degree, but no one's ever asked for my transcript. So no one really knows that I got, a 2.2.
Now people know.
Yeah. Do you know that I didn't know that you could get higher than a 4.0 until like 2 years ago, and somebody told me? I'm like, really? How is that even possible? I thought that was perfect. But there's more. I'm like, what? I didn't know.
Well, what's awesome, so many things are awesome about this, but one of the things that's particularly awesome is that it didn't hurt your self-esteem. So many people see that number and they think, but
that's not actually true.
Okay.
It actually destroyed my confidence. I still would have either a chip on my shoulder or I'm really close friends with some very smart people now, clearly, that I've been able to spend time with. Like, one of my clients in the COO Alliance just won on Jeopardy last week. I mean, I'm like, wait, what? I had to look up how to spell Jeopardy because the spell check kept kicking in wrong. So no, it's the school system for 18 years told me I was stupid.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to recover from that. So no, it did actually hurt me. It did hurt my self-confidence. So now admitting that the way I got through school was cheating or was scraping through or was barely passing isn't a badge of honor so much as just a statement as well, just to kind of say, look, like, it's not, the school system wasn't made for everybody.
Certainly not. I agree with that. So you go through this school system, you're building businesses, you're doing things on the side, you're day trading. What was the point at which you realized, the COO niche is a really interesting one for me?
It was actually only 5 years ago. So I've been coaching real companies for about 13 years. I typically work with clients that are 50 to 500 employees, and I've coached clients in 26 countries. And it was 3 of my coaching clients, one that's from New York. They're called Tenuity. They used to be called Elite SEM. And then another client called Acceleration Partners, and then a third called Scribe, which used to be Book in a Box.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I'm an advisor to them as well. And those 3 companies, their COOs were talking to each other because I was coaching them. And I didn't realize that they all knew each other, but they knew each other because they reached out after doing coaching calls with me. And they asked if I would start the COO Alliance. Well, they asked if I would get a group of COOs together. And I said, well, I don't really work with COOs. And they said, well, you're coaching Ben and you're coaching Zach. And I was like, oh shit, I guess you're right. I guess I do. So I threw up a landing page and I just said, if I can get 10 COOs to come for 2 days and pay $60 for 2 days with me, then I'll do an event. 25 hours later, 6,700 from 10 people, all paid. So I was like, there's a model. And that was the starting point. And then I just kept listening to them as to what their needs were. And they don't want entrepreneurs in the room, right? They really want a space that's for them, that they can work on their skills and gain systems to grow their companies and learn how to work better with their CEOs. But they don't want CEOs in the room distracting the discussion. And they don't want to go and listen to more speakers because they can do that, or they can, read a book or, go to a conference. What they want was time to mastermind other. So we facilitate events where they connect each other, they present to each other, they brainstorm together, they share, problems and help unstick each other. So I'm more the kind of coordinator of it now. I try not to be the one on stage.
That's wonderful. It sounds like you really saw an unmet need, jumped to it, and holy shit, was it an unmet need?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm in so many other master groups for CEOs that I'm connecting with all these CEOs, and every time I talk about it, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've got to get my second in command into your group." So yeah, it's just worked out really nicely.
Awesome. Just curious. So when you bring together all these COOs, what are some of the challenges that come up in the room? Just want to know a little bit what happens behind the scenes.
Well, I'll give you one that most people wouldn't think about, but they really, really love their CEO across the board. And if they didn't, they wouldn't be there. But they all, with the exception of none, think their CEOs are crazy. And they love the fact that their CEOs are crazy, right? But their CEOs are bipolar. Their CEOs are ADD. Their CEOs are driven. Their CEOs are out of the box. Their CEOs are idea generation machines. And they're not. And they're always working on, how do I strengthen that relationship? Kind of like a husband and wife in a traditional marriage where, you know, a guy isn't a male version of a female that's hairier, right? We're just different creatures, right? And we can work well to get to understand each other and work together to become a team. That's been probably the most unique for me, was all of them thinking their CEO's crazy and all of them wanting to strengthen that relationship, which was really cool.
Wow. So what are some of
the other thing is, and they don't want their CEO's job. You know, I think a lot of people would think that the COO wants to move into the CEO role. It's like a lawyer doesn't want to be a doctor. Just because they were the smartest kids in my class doesn't mean that the doctors want to be lawyers and lawyers want to be doctors. They don't want to do the other's job at all.
Right. They lean into what they're good at and what they want to do and the way their brain functions. It makes a lot of sense.
You just mentioned the book for the queen bee of COOs. Sheryl Sandberg wrote the book Lean In, and she's the COO for Facebook.
Right. That's true. I've read that book. I get it.
Lean In.
I'm curious. So that challenge of a COO wanting to be closer to the CEO who they deem as crazy, what are some of the solutions that people talk about?
One of the big ones is the personality profiles and truly learning about the other person so you understand what makes them tick, right? So we do a different personality profile on both the CEO and the COO every year. So we've done DISC profiles, we've done Colby profiles. We'll look at the actual, we've done love languages, and we'll look at the different traits and then not try to change the other person, but try to understand how to work well with those traits that they have, and vice versa, how to go back to the CEO and say, hey, here's a little bit more about me. Here's how you could work well with me. Here's what will drive me crazy, to teach the CEO how to work well with the COO. In fact, I interviewed a guest on our Second in Command podcast, Matt McGinnis, and he's the COO for Rippling. And he created an operating manual for himself. And he gives it to every employee in the company so they can learn how to work with him. It's like a 3-page document that describes everything about him. So instead of waiting 6 months to figure this guy out, day one.
Super, super interesting. And self-awareness
cool, right?
is always so powerful. Curious if you've been creating these spaces where COOs can be with each other and not with CEOs. Do you ever find yourself after that sort of co-coaching CEOs and COOs, almost like a marriage counselor might?
Yeah, and actually we ran an event last September, and we're doing it again this coming September, where we're inviting the CEO and the COO to come to the event together for 2.5 days. And we're bringing in a personality profile person, we're bringing in a very high-powered marriage counselor, and we're bringing in someone to work on conflict management and communication to really work on strengthening that yin and yang relationship. And very different between the CEO and any other C-level executive, right? With most C-level executives, they're at the retreats, they're at their planning meetings, they might be in strategy meetings, they might be at their weekly leadership team meetings. But the CEO and COO are like a team that is very different from the rest of the leadership team, right? The COO is the yin and yang to the CEO. So we actually work really well or really closely with them on helping them to build that bond. So yeah, I coach a number of companies that have the CEO and COO in coaching with me, but then we also will run those events every 2 years where we invite the CEO just to that one event. And it's specifically for building that stronger bond with the team.
Makes perfect sense. And I think you painted a beautiful picture about what the experience is like of your COO community at the moment. Curious what's next for it. What do you see as some additional things that you want to build into your offering?
So we just launched last month what we call the COO Alliance 2.0. And we went again back out to all of our members and started talking to them, partially because of COVID, because all of our events used to be 2-day and 2.5-day in person. And a lot of our members couldn't travel. We also were getting a lot of interest globally. We just signed a member from Kenya, signed one in Geneva. We have one in New Zealand. And they weren't clearly going to be traveling to Scottsdale and Vancouver 3 times a year. So in listening to them, we completely changed the model. And it's now 12 monthly 3-hour events. So 3 hours a month, we have a speaker, they do a breakout, they have group discussions, and then they're off in that 3-hour period. And then in between events, we have the Slack channel, we have Q&As with me, we have the book club, but facilitating a lot more of that. And then we have the optional in-person events as well. So that's what we're working on, is launching the 2.0, and it's going ridiculously fast, way faster than we anticipated. So we clearly hit the right nerve, and also with pricing, I think we found the right price point. But then we will be launching probably in 12 to 14 months, a pure online Facebook style community where we'll just allow the groups to collaborate with thousands of COOs.
Wow, congrats. That's a pretty big shift. Something that I found very interesting is that it seems like COVID, which is, a global crisis, it's very difficult for a lot of people, a lot of companies to get through it. It seems like it almost inspired you to pivot and evolve for the better. Can you talk a little bit more about really how COVID has inspired these shifts?
Sure. So our old model was we had 5 events per year, and members paid $20,000 to come to 3 of the 5 events. So members would travel, they would come in for 2.5 days. So they had their travel time and their hotel costs and the event cost. And then when COVID hit, we had an event coming up in April and we had to go online for it. So we ran a 2.5-day event over Zoom. It's tough, man, to pay attention for 2.5 days. Like, it's impossible, right? And then we had to do it again in June. So I was like, well, shit, we're not going to do our September event online. Like, we're going to definitely be back in person in September. We couldn't do September. So by the time we were getting ready to have to do our 3rd event online, I was like, enough's enough. This isn't going to work for members. Now, our net promoter score was still very high. It used to be 86% over the last 4 years was our average net promoter score, but we were hovering around 70% because we were forcing people into a model that it wasn't meant for. So I went out to 5 of our founding members and 5 of our current members and just asked them, what would, if we were to kind of play Yahtzee, if we were to take all the good stuff and roll it out and have a new model, what would it look like? And they created the model. They just told me the pieces of it, and I kind of hobbled them together and went back and got feedback, and they created the pricing and the model and the offer, and that was easy. I kind of think about a lot of this in business the same way that when I was a child growing up in a home in Canada, I'd write my letter to Santa, right? And I would give my letter to Santa to my mom, and we'd walk down to the mailbox and we'd put the letter in the mailbox. And, 6 weeks later, I'd look under the Christmas tree and, oh my gosh, there were all these presents from Santa. And they were exactly what I wanted. I'm like, he read my letter. What I didn't realize was my mom read my letter. So instead of me trying to figure out what COOs will like, I just ask them, like, what would you like? And then they tell me, and I take what they want and I make it into a program and I just give that to them, and they like it. Well, it's pretty simple when you just ask them what they want.
And what's awesome about your audience in particular is how detail oriented and systems oriented they are. So the answers that you'll get from that particular audience are just going to be good answers.
They're exactly right on. Yeah. I actually learned that from a CEO in South Africa, where I asked him, how do you lead large companies in South Africa? And he was saying that you can't tell them what to do, because you end up with the white Afrikaans leading like a massively black workforce, that if you tell them what to do, they're going to block you at every turn.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is show them where you want to go and ask the team and the employees how they think they should get there, and let them come up with the plans, let them create all the ideas, as long as you drive them towards your vision, and they'll be more inspired to do what they want to do. So it's the similar kind of a model.
Fantastic insight. So as we come towards the end of our time together today, Cameron, one of the ways that we love to end, because we're a fun-loving company, we're a human-loving company, curious what's fun for you outside of business. So building this awesome COO Alliance group through different iterations, what do you do when you're not working?
I guess besides the kind of normal stuff that I do a lot of, which is the golf and tennis and skiing and hiking, would be and travel, I'm feeling like completely restrained. Last year I went to 18 countries. I take 10 weeks vacation every year, so I do a lot of global travel. What I've really gotten back into recently is cooking, and really kind of diving back into the cookbooks and planning out like a week's worth of amazing meals, and love cooking. So I've been doing a lot more of that recently.
That's wonderful. What's the best recipe you've made in the last few months?
Best recipe I've made in the last few months is called œuf omelette, and it's a French dish called purple eggs. And you take the celery and garlic and onions and carrot, and you chop it up really small, and you kind of saute it all until they're really browned. And then you pour a bottle before the bottle, then you put in some bacon and some mushrooms, and you brown all of those as well. So it's really nice and browned and caramelized. And then you pour an entire bottle of Burgundy wine, and I use really nice Burgundy wine, into a pot, and you simmer it down until it's reduced by 75%. So the entire wine has now gone from a full bottle down to about a quarter, maybe a half a cup of wine. It's this thick purple sauce. And you poach eggs and serve them over garlic toast, and you pour the sauce with all of the ingredients over top of these eggs, and you have it for dinner.
That's ridiculous.
It's so good.
Love it. Okay,
yeah.
I'm canceling the rest of my meetings for the day, and I'm going to go make purple poached eggs because that sounds awesome.
I will send you my recipe for œuf omelette. I'll send it over to you right now.
Please do.
Okay.
Well, look, Cameron, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your wonderful, joyful presence. Really learned a lot. I think a lot of the tips that you talked about for COOs and CEOs, it's so important for all of us that deal with any sort of relationship to keep in mind. A lot of what you talked about with how to lead teams, how to ask people and give them the power to choose their own journey, very applicable to all of the leaders that are watching out there. So thank you. Really, really appreciate you and your time.
You're welcome. Thanks very much, both of you. Really appreciate you having me on.